Welcome back to Practical Parenting, the podcast that helps empower parents in the trenches, find joy in the process, and thrive through it all. I'm Christina Wales, here with my co-host, Dr. Terry Nguyen, Chair of Pediatrics at GBMC Healthcare. Developmental milestones, especially early on in our parenting, there's a lot of things we're navigating, trying to figure out. These can be really easy metrics, supposedly, for us to focus on to make sure we're parenting correctly, quote unquote. But they are not as cut and dry as we'd like them to be, unfortunately. And for many parents, worries about children meeting developmental milestones can be really stressful. And they can cause us to over-worry about how our kids are, again, quote-unquote, measuring up. But Dr. Nguyen is here to give us the skinny on milestones, break down why it can actually be harmful for us to focus so intently on these metrics and, what we can kind of do instead. So let's dive in.
Excellent. Where shall we start? Thank you.
I think the first question that's coming up for me is it feels like this question is coming up a lot more than it used to, especially related to ADHD, which is one we're going to get into more specifically today. So is there a reason why it seems like it's more commonly talked about now?
Well, I think people are more aware of the diagnosis attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But that's it. They're aware of the title, the name, the ADHD. And then when they see that perhaps their child is rather impulsive, has really high energy, the question will be, does my child have ADHD? And that's not a really simple question, right? It is, what's your child's age? Where is their developmental level? And are these behaviors affecting life at home? Relationships with peers and family members? Is it affecting their life at daycare or at school? So it's the whole contextual environment and everyone that's in that child's world and how that child is interacting in their world, right? So you can't just ask me, you have a 4-year-old who is like high energy and, can't sit still and, blah, blah, blah. Does my child have ADHD? No, we have to kind of really talk about more, what's their age? What would we expect for this developmental age? And then I always go back to the basics, my favorite basics is the trifecta of health. What's the sleep situation? What's the nutritional situation? What's the movement situation? And now I'm going to add to it also, what are the relationships and the connections, family, peers, teachers, and what's their use on social media and electronics? All those things can affect your child's behavior, affects our behavior even, right? So we can start a little bit. Let's go to, it's probably toddler age and preschool age that parents start asking me, the pediatrician, does my child have ADHD?
Well, because I feel like, and maybe before we dive into this, I feel like my generation, I don't know if that's where ADHD started to become like a diagnosis, but I just remember very few kids were diagnosed with it, but when they were, it was always the kids, like you said, they couldn't sit still in class, they were hyperactive and distracting, but that was basically it. That was sort of the definition of what those kids are. And so I feel like we're growing up with that definition in our minds, and that's sort of normal 2- and 3-year-old behavior to a certain extent. So maybe this is where you were going, but maybe what are the common symptoms that we need to look at as a whole? Let's define it for people so it's not just they can't sit still.
Yeah. So I think that's a great way to center us on this conversation. So attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. There's three types. There's the attention deficit, primarily attention deficit, meaning that they don't seem very focused. They're here in class and they're daydreaming. That's the famous one. You're daydreaming, or, they can't remember, like the kids who forget everything. You just ask them to do something, they go to do it, and then they forgot what it was that they were doing, and they go off and do something else. The kid who can't seem to complete a task. Halfway there, and then we're off somewhere else because we got distracted, right? forgetfulness, daydreaming, not just rushing through things so that they can go on to the next thing. Okay, so that's low attention. So that's that. If your child has predominantly that's attention ADHD inattentive type. Then there is the impulsive hyperactivity. The impulsive kids, I'm sorry, that first thing that I said was really went more for the impulsive children. I'm going to rush through my homework because I have to go on to the next thing. I have a thought in my mind and I'm going to act right on that. There's no processing, I have the idea, I'm doing it. And then I can't let go of the idea until I've done it. Or let's say your child asked you for something and you said, 5 minutes, please. And it's, and they're nudging you until you do it. I mean, some kids can wait, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then the impulsive kids, there is no patience, there is no waiting. The thought happened, the action has to follow, okay? The hyperactive kids, they never sit still. I can tell when I go into a room with patient who may have hyperactivity. It's like a ping pong ball, just bouncing, on the walls, ricocheting around the room. They have so much energy, right? They can't stop talking. The words are flowing out. And oftentimes they're very creative, by the way. I love the stories that they tell, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's no pause. You can't even interject yourself in there
Mm-hmm.
because they have so much to share and so much, so much energy.
And
right?
I feel like even when you try to interject, they're still talking because they can't.
Yeah.
They're focused on what they're saying.
On them. And, the conversation has to keep going.
Mm-hmm.
They have to dump it all out. So that would be, the impulsivity or the hyperactivity, that would be attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, predominantly impulsive, predominantly hyperactive. So there's the predominantly inattentive, predominantly hyperactive, and then there's combined type where you have both, okay? And in the past, boys were much easier, much more easily diagnosed or noticed because they often had the hyperactive, impulsive form. So they're the ones who couldn't sit in class still. They're trying to get their friends' attention, the whole class's attention. They might be seen as like kind of the class clown, and everybody's like, oh, it's so funny, until it's not, because now you're disturbing the whole class, not just yourself, and nobody's learning. So boys, often that is how they come to attention. Now it's interesting, girls, they often are missed because they may have the inattentive type of ADHD, where they're just daydreaming, they're not focused. The whole class happened, and if you ask them what they learned, it's like, oh, I don't know, and it really is an I don't know, okay? So the prevalence of the ADHD diagnosis worldwide is about 7%. The U.S. data is about 9% of kids between 2 to 17 have ADHD of some kind, okay? And it's about 2% of children between 2 and 5, and then 8% of children between 2 to 17. Yeah. So, and what's the average age of diagnosis is 7 years old. So this brings to the point where you said, wow, aren't they supposed to be active and have a lot of energy and creativity when they're younger? Absolutely. So a lot of things that we then give a diagnosis to, what I remind parents is that these are normal behaviors for certain ages of development, but then they have to extinguish or diminish because the child has to have progress on their development, right? So bouncy, lots of energy, running around, having great confabulated stories, perfect for 4 and 5-year-olds. If you're still doing that at 7 or 8, maybe not, because there should be some self-regulation that we're in class, we're going to sit and, and do some work and complete the work before you go on to the next thing. It shouldn't be the thought comes in your head and then you got to do it. So you're in the middle of class. Well, the thought in your head was you wanted to do X, Y, or Z and you run out of the classroom, right? That's not developmentally appropriate for that age.
Now, I heard pediatricians' offices won't even diagnose kids under the age of 4. Is that true?
Nah, not really. Yes, we won't diagnose under the age of 4, but you can see sometimes the kids who,
You want to
yeah,
monitor.
you want to monitor, right? Like I can tell if I'm exhausted after a visit with your wonderful child. I mean, there's bubbly toddlers and preschoolers, and there's like over, energetic. And remember, you reflect other people's energy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I were to have that much energy, I'd be exhausted after 20, 30 minutes. So yeah, that's my secret thing that goes, okay, well, I'm going to observe you and see how it goes in kindergarten and early on in school. But let's go back to the basics here.
Mm-hmm.
There's some physiological things that will contribute to perhaps your child not having good focus, not having good attention, or being hyperactive. I'm going to put that in quotes. Are they sleeping enough? Remember, children need sleep. That's where their minds and their brains get to rest, and they are building more connections in their sleep. They get creative in that pathway also when they have good deep sleep. And there isn't, as we've talked before on our sleep episode, there isn't like this is exactly the number of hours
Mm-hmm.
this child needs. There are ranges. And then it's what does your child, on an unplanned day, what would they sleep 10 hours, 11 hours? On a free day, on a weekend day, look at it. What time do they go to sleep and what time do they naturally wake up?
Mm-hmm.
That's the goal for how much sleep your child at that age really truly desires for their body, right? So there's the sleep part. And then you might say, well, my child can't fall asleep. Then we go into, well, are there screens before bedtime? If there's screens before bedtime, yeah, well, you just shut down the melatonin that your body has to make. So you're not going to be able to fall asleep. So get rid of the screens an hour before bed. Make sure they're getting the sleep that their body needs, right? Make the room cool because it's hard to fall asleep in a hot room. And then make the place safe for sleep. Some kids are scared of the dark. Some kids are scared that there's monsters under the bed. Go back to our sleep episode, right? And then nutrition. Okay, what you eat has everything to do with how you behave, how disease processes may or may not appear in you. So some of that hyperactivity actually might be that sugary breakfast that they had an hour and a half before school started, and now they've got that, and then they're going to hit rock bottom. Okay, about in in a little bit. So was there a sugary breakfast? Was it? I don't know. I can name a lot of such sugary breakfasts, but
Tell that story that you told me about the little girl.
oh yes, 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 yes.
Such a good example.
Yeah. So here's the thing. I saw a patient recently in the office. She is 6 years old, and my hand is on the door. I'm about to leave, and the parents go, she started having like her heart's racing, and it just happens every once in a while out of the blue. She has heart palpitations. I was like, oh, she doesn't seem like a particularly nervous child. She's pretty happy, developmental milestones, very appropriate. So when does it happen? Well, it often happens when she's with her grandparents. I said, oh, so do her grandparents often give her treats? Oh my gosh, yes. They are the gifters of candy, endless candy. I was like, okay. So, it only happens with the grandparents, and the grandparents love giving her candy. What am I to deduce here is maybe the heart rushing was from that insulin high that she just got, right? And now we're all thinking she's having some issues here. Yeah, heart rate went up. She feels like she's rushing. She got a sugar rush, guys. So if your child is having a sugar rush for breakfast, well, guess what? What's going to show up in the classroom, right?
I think that story is so good because it just encourages parents if you're questioning something about your kid, take a step back and look at the whole picture, look holistically at what's, you were able to take them out of that and pinpoint some things that you could see from an outsider's perspective. So try to do that for yourself so you can kind of see where the dots are connecting. Like, I often write it down if it's helpful to just like notice the patterns on the
Yeah.
page to see where you can find some of these, because maybe it is a lifestyle change. I noticed one of my kids, funnily enough, what you're describing sounds very, very similar to one of my kids. And I noticed when they started going to school and had 2 outside times a day and were forced to focus and had more activities going on throughout the day, that they were not as reactive in the afternoon because they were getting some of that energy out, to your movement point. So all of it's connected.
Oh, it totally is. And so, the food dyes, the food additives, is there a direct link? We haven't been able to prove it, right? But yeah, if your child suddenly goes from lots of processed foods with a lot of food additives to more just basic, plant-based eating and non-processed foods that you make at home, you might see an improvement in their behavior. I know I have for one of my families who, oh, I didn't know that, omega-3 fatty acids were really important for brain development. Yeah. And this family really changed the way they fed their child who was diagnosed with ADHD. Guess what? That patient of mine is not on medication.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They really did a big haul over on eating. They're eating salmon, which is high in omega-3 fatty acids. They eat 2 to 3 times a week, more plant-based eating, less processed foods, and the sleep. Oh, wow. Oh, we didn't know that 8 hours wasn't enough for him at 8 years of age. Yeah, it isn't. He got more sleep, and he seemed a little bit less forgetful or less inattentive, okay? So we talked about the 3 things there. The movement is so critical. So the recommendation from the American Academy of Pediatrics is children should have an hour of outdoor play every day if possible. Okay, maybe you don't make the hour, maybe it's only half an hour, but any amount of physical activity, that's incredibly important, right? They have to let that energy out somewhere. And if they don't expel that energy, guess what? It shows up right before bedtime. This is why you have the bouncing bunny, the ever-ready bunny, bouncing, 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 for an hour or 2 before bed. And then we already talked about screens. And then relationships, like, do they have friends that they can play with? I mean, your child may be hyperactive to you because they're an only child, or, you're their only source of socialization. Yeah. They don't know how to play with by themselves yet, which would be appropriate for toddler age sometimes. But if you're 7 or 8, I hope that you've been able to figure out how to calmly play with yourself, build things, draw, whatever. So that's how some physiologic symptoms can result in behaviors that we're like, oh, there's a diagnosis for that. Maybe it's ADHD. There are some kids who really do have the diagnosis, okay? So what? Your child may have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Do you need to treat them with medication, every single child? No. So here's the biggie. For the children who are 4 to 5 years old and your pediatrician and you highly suspected and you've done the evaluation and you found that these behaviors have been persistent for 6 months or more and they've interrupted the child's life in 2 areas, school and home or daycare, and it's disrupted their activities and other people, yeah, okay, we may have that diagnosis in your 4 to 5-year-old, but it's going to be harder, right? Because that's also the time where some children have to learn the self-regulation. But the first thing that we want to do for children under 6 is do parental behavior therapy. Yeah, because the kids aren't going to change their behavior. So we have to optimize their lifestyle. And then we as parents have to learn the skills to how to react to the behaviors, how to anticipate the behaviors, and how can we divert the attention from the naughty behavior so that maybe it doesn't even happen, or once it has, how do you move them into, distract them into another activity,
Mm-hmm.
right? So big biggie is really behavioral modification, and it's about parenting classes for parents, behavioral training for parents, how you react to your child, how you help them and support them rather than get in there with them. Like
Mm-hmm.
they're all excited and they really, created the spin, and then you're in there with them, spinning with them, and then everybody's hyperactive, right?
Yeah.
So believe it or not, that's the number one treatment, non psychopharm non medication treatment.
Pharmacological.
Yes, that's the word I was looking for. Thank you. For children under 6. So it would
Yeah.
be rare for me to ever really think of treating a child under 6. Now,
With medication, you're
with
saying. Yeah.
medication, and honestly, the best results come when you have behavioral modification and medication. So in
Mm-hmm.
some cases, medications are needed, and you'll come to that if it's disrupting their lives. And you've done all the other modifications. You've done modifications at home, and you've done modifications at school, meaning the child gets to sit at the front of the class, has instructions that are given one step at a time. Perhaps the child also gets to do testing in a room separate from their classmates, okay? And they're writing down, if they're able to write, right? They're writing down their assignments. So if you've done that and the life, so you've done the behavior for you and child, you've done classroom modifications, and you really optimize the lifestyle, the sleep, the physical activity, and movement, and limited electronics, and ensured that they had connections and peers. Okay. And if it's still, they're off, yeah, we might consider medications.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
In conjunction with
In
continuing the rest.
conjunction and continue with all the rest. But I'm going to tell you, I think that if we did all of that I've just mentioned, the non-pharmacologic, we probably could have a significant fewer number of children on medications, because sleep deprived, it's happening to children in elementary school. It's not just the high schoolers, right? And the elementary age kids have less personal self-regulation. If
Mm-hmm.
if they don't get enough sleep, it's a poopy day. Okay. There's no way around it. Anything and everything causes them to melt. And then there's that paradoxical reaction. You're so tired, you're actually really hyperactive. Okay. And the poor focus, yeah, you have to have brain rest in order for you to focus.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, you're like, I don't know, Johnny doesn't seem to be able to do that. Well, yeah, he didn't sleep enough. His brain hasn't rested enough. He can't focus on squat, right? And then if you need medication, it's stimulant medication. It's been around for a really long time. What we would prescribe are are medications that will last for 6 to 8 hours to carry you through the school day. But I want to remind parents that that's not the panacea. That's not the fix-it-all. This is just to buy your child some time as their brain is maturing, okay?
Mm.
Because the executive function of our brain, that's where we learn how to regulate and, process. That starts developing in our adolescent years, and it doesn't complete until mid-20s or even late 20s,
Mm.
right? And that's where you can have an impulse, but then you get to step back and go, oh, is that how I really want to do it?
Mm-hmm.
Or, how do you prioritize things? Like there's all these things coming at you. What are you going to do first? What are you going to do second? So that's not developing until they're in their adolescent years. We can't have a child lose learning time and socialization time, right? In elementary school up until their brain starts developing these tasks, these skills. So that's why we do the stimulant medications. But we also want to create the environment where the child realizes when they're a little off, like, oh, I was looking out the window, but actually I'm in school, so I should refocus back on the teacher. Or, I'm feeling fidgety. What could I do with it? Can I do some activities I know. I call it mindfulness activities, but things to refocus myself, okay? Things to expel energy or sharpen my focus that will bring me back to center. So gradually increasing skills that kids can regulate for themselves. But in order for that to happen, you also have to model it,
Right.
right? And children, no matter what the diagnosis is, there's a good chance that there's a parent in the family with a similar diagnosis. So remember our favorite thing, center yourself first, and then you can help center your child. So you have to model it, and then you can meet your child where they are. You can't just have these strict rules. They didn't work for you, so why would they work for your child? So it's an understanding. And then remember, the meds are just to tie you over until that maturation happens. So I want to remind parents that, somewhere towards the end of high school, there should be enough regulation, self-regulation that's developed that perhaps your child is only using the medication for crunches, for exams, for deadlines. They don't need it every day at school, okay? And I can have a huge talk about all the side effects. There's side effects to everything, right? And so we don't want to become reliant. Are these meds addictive? No, there's no study shows that they're addictive, but you might turn to being very reliant on them. And the only thing that will carry you through your lifetime is your lifestyle and your habits. So help them create those habits, okay? Model it, support them in doing it, and that's what's going to carry them through. The meds were just an interim. A great site that I want to refer everyone to is CHADD.org, and it is children and adults who have ADHD. It has great resources for parents, resources for their children. I promise you won't be disappointed.
Awesome. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground on that topic, and I learned a thing or two. So if anybody has any questions about anything, feel free to find us on social media and ask, and we'll see you in the next one.
Great. Thank you.
All right.
You must have questions. Everybody has questions about ADHD.
Yes. And ask your pediatrician. Don't be afraid to inquire about it, but try some of these lifestyle changes first and see what happens.
Absolutely. Thanks.
All right. See ya.